Hello and welcome to Star USA Training. Today is Tuesday, November 18th, and this is our second in a three-part series covering 2025 year-end insights and preparations for 2026. Whether you're joining us live or watching the recording back, we appreciate you being here. If you are attending live, we encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining us from today. Many of you are already doing that. That is fantastic. Thank you. We also invite you to connect with Star USA on LinkedIn. We are focused on growing our presence there this year by sharing valuable content and industry insights, updates, articles, and training opportunities. We'd love to connect with you, and if you're comfortable, feel free to drop your LinkedIn profile in the chat as well so we can continue the conversation beyond today's session. This is being recorded. After the webinar, we will upload the recording, slides, and any additional materials to our website. If you registered for the webinar, you will receive an email with a link once all those resources become available. For those seeking continuing education credits, we'll provide one CE code at the end of the webinar. This session qualifies for 1 credit for licensed customs brokers and those with CCS credentials through NCBFAA. Please be sure to save the code given at the end of the session. If you're watching this back on YouTube later, it will be a different code on the screen at the end of the session. We encourage you to stay engaged throughout today's session. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat at any time, or if there are content-related questions that you want me to hit at the end of the webinar, please do so in the Q&A portion of the webinar chat thingy. Lastly, a quick disclaimer. I am a licensed customs broker, but today's discussion is informational only and should not be considered legal advice or the transaction of customs business on your behalf. If you or your company need assistance after the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, let's get started. For those that don't know me, my name is Mike Easton. I am the President and General Manager of Star USA. I've been in the trade industry for over 20 years. Trading compliance, have my broker's license. I do a lot of things. I'm kind of dispensing with my normal intros for this end of year series here. But first, I want to kind of talk about what we discussed in the first part of this series. And the link on this slide here, you can click once we post these materials on the web. But last month's must-haves were collaborative resources and communication channels. This was my take on what I think I found to be the most effective for me in trying to navigate 2025's, let's call it volatility in the trade and compliance industry. There have been a lot of moving pieces and parts across pretty much every sector of trade and compliance this year, whether you're US based or abroad, whether you're in automotive or agriculture. There's been a lot of change and shift and attention being paid from all levels of any organization. And in light of that fact, I have found that being able to work with people has been the most effective strategy for trying to solve for the problems that we're facing. So we talked a little bit last time about collaborative resources, and we also talked about the importance of effective communication channels and being able to communicate with your partners, with your teams, with your broker and your forwarder, suppliers, your customers, and communicate about what the challenges are and how to overcome them. We also heard from Lee Mersick of Global Resilience Advisory on geopolitics and intelligence, presenting what I consider, for me at least, to be a different perspective on trade and compliance and how to pay attention to the shifting nature of geopolitics and what the intelligence community is paying attention to. So that was a very insightful and unique perspective that I really appreciated. And we also heard from Chris Lundy of Roller Logistics on the perspective of a U.S. customs broker in 2025. And one of the comments we received from that is, Chris definitely needs a hug. And I agree, give your broker a hug. Or if that's too awkward, tell them thanks. Show some appreciation. It's been a difficult year for everybody. And the more we can show appreciation to one another, I think the better off we'll all feel. So with that in mind, I wanted to share during last month's session, I asked everyone in the trade or in the chat to share their resources that they've been using throughout 2025. And we've kind of summarized them here on this slide. And I wanted to take this as another opportunity this month to say, if there are resources you don't see here, please go ahead and share them again in the chat. I think it's important to be aware of what tools and information is available to us. I have to give a disclaimer here. I don't particularly endorse or vouch for any of these. I can't do that on this webinar. But this is a good opportunity for you to share with one another your resources and what has made a difference for you in 2025. Difference makers are more important now than they've ever been, in my opinion. I do use some of these on a regular basis. One of the ones that I did add to this list that I did not see mentioned in the chat was the ICPA mailing list. I have gotten tremendous value out of the discussions on those mailing lists and the questions that come around from those. So I added that one myself. So yeah, if you have other resources, please share in the chat. We did hear from folks last month. Some of the ones I pulled into this are somebody said, I have gotten more support and resources in this webinar than all year combined. Thank you all for dropping links and info on what you're doing and using. And that is thank you to the rest of the people on the webinar. That's not thank you to us. It just goes to show how impactful sharing and being open about things can be. And then somebody else said, this webinar left us feeling better, not worse. And they were shocked by that. So I definitely recommend that you work with your network. And in light of that, actually, I wanted to share one more set of facts from last month's conversation. Joe, thank you for posting that link to ICPA in the chat there. I took a poll last month on how people use their networks, and I wanted to highlight some of the information that came out of that because I thought it was pretty interesting. About a third of you, a little bit over a third, said that you use webinars and conferences as your one of your key networking resources. And I thought that was obviously it should have been 100% because you were all on a webinar when you answered that question. But I'll take the 1/3 there. And about a little bit under a third, under 30%, said work teams and industry groups, and only 1% said my network is great. Which I found to be very, very interesting. And I think it speaks to sort of the void that exists in staying in the trade compliance community throughout 2025 and years before and after. I'm sure it will continue to be a thorn or a challenge for us to network with one another. I don't consider myself to be much of a networker. I tend to go to webinars and conferences for content, for learning, for expanding my own understanding, and very little for the networking aspects. I'm kind of bad at that piece of the equation, but I am working on it, and I'm trying to get better at it. And I actually wanted to pose a new question here. Where did I put my polls? Okay, there. I'm going to launch a new poll here. Which activities do you think will be most impactful for you in 2026? So taking a look at kind of what we've been using in 2025, and in light of the conversation that we had last month, and as we've all kind of had a little bit more time to think about it, where do you see yourself focusing from a networking perspective or just from a staying in tune with what's going on? I've felt that coordination with other people has been very, very impactful this year. So I am interested to see what other people are thinking. And I'll leave this up for just a few minutes. Maybe not even that long. And I hope some of you appreciate my jokes. We'll give it about another 10 seconds. You can answer multiple here. Feel free. And there we go. Okay, I'm going to share these results real quick. And just taking a quick glance at it, I'll think about this more between now and next month, but 85% webinars are where it's at. Good job, everyone. Attending live conferences and events is still going strong with about, 40% isn't a huge number. Thank you, Melanie. A couple of you are lone wolves and finding religion. Excellent. We'll kind of do some analysis on this because I think this is going to continue to be something that's in demand in 2026 is making sure that we're able to connect with other people that are working through the industry, experiencing things in different ways. Those shared experiences can lend a great deal of insight and understanding to your own situation. It's not necessarily a self-serving thing, but it really does help lift up the entire community the more that we're able to share our experiences, even if it's to say, I am completely confused. I don't know what's going on, or I screwed something up real bad. Things like that are part of what this industry has been, um, in my experience, from the very beginning, but certainly in this past year. And to really support the networking efforts, STAR had our first Elevate Summit for Women in International Trade last week. We had the event in Cleveland, Ohio, and it was, from all reports, a tremendous success. I want to say thank you to everyone that attended. I want to say thank you to the teams at STAR that put this together. Melissa and Olivia and Larissa, in particular, worked very, very hard with our partners to make it happen with the venue and a lot of different things to make it come together. I want to just show some appreciation for the people that made the effort to show up. I know it's not easy to get out and do something, especially in this industry, in this day and age. But it was meaningful. And we are planning something for spring, I believe, in 2026 in Columbus area, perhaps. So that's keep that kind of in mind and stay tuned as we go on. And I also want to say thank you to the sponsors that sponsored the summit that helped us be able to put this together. Our ticket prices were $25, I believe, very, very low. So the sponsors really helped to carry some of the burdens that was that just it takes to put this stuff together. So MTA Lines, thank you for being a peak sponsor. You were with us from the very beginning, and we appreciate that. If you're on the webinar today, it's good to see you. International Wealth Partners and the stories that were shared were very, very meaningful to a lot of the audience. Trade Compliance Recruiting Solutions, those of you that are in the industry have probably heard of them, and they are very, very impactful to helping people find and build careers in international trade, and to West Forwarding Services as well, also based in the Middlebrook Heights area, just a few feet away from the venue that we had. It was really good that you guys contributed to that event, and thank you again for doing that. So that brings us to kind of what I wanted to talk about a bit today, which is the concept of strategic thinking. And I'm going to use it in the context of tariff mitigation as we go through this, but it really, for me, boiled down to how to keep my eyes in the right direction throughout the course of 2025. Obviously, it was a challenge in many, many ways. And there were some things that I personally had to contend with. And I wanted to talk about these for a moment just to kind of be honest. One of the first things that I had to deal with was keeping my head right, not letting burnout, stress, panic, any of those things crowd out my ability to move through each day, one to the next. I'm not sure what everybody else's experiences were like, but there were many very, very stressful moments throughout the course of 2025. I anticipate more in 2026. And one of the things that I don't know how to articulate properly, but at some point, probably around May, I want to say, I had to come to the realization in my own head to say, you know what, this is my job. This is what I'm going to do, and it's not worth being stressed about what is happening that I obviously can't control the administration. I have no bearing on those things. So in light of that fact, what am I going to do? Am I going to be stressed out and burnt out because of it? Or am I just going to accept that there is a way to move through these things? And I did a recalibration in my own head. It was meaningful for me. I don't know if it would be helpful for anybody else. I am not a professional at that sort of thing, but it helped me keep my head right to the point where I can have a conversation here in November while the Supreme Court case is being kind of adjudicated, while a lot of things are happening every day as the government reopens after a long shutdown, and at least not be stressed. That's the best I got. Also, I took a vacation last week. That was very helpful. Forced myself to do that. But yeah, the other challenges I've had were identifying problem domains. The problem domain is something that I've a phrase that I've used at work for many, many years is trying to actually make sure that I understand which problem I'm trying to solve. It's not always the one that is the based on the question that's being asked right now. There might be a different problem underneath that or next to it or above that that has to be solved first. And really putting effort into thinking about what the core problem that needs to be solved is, and then using that as a way to frame how I'm going to get to that point. Usually, meaning I have to solve several other things to get to that point, but identifying what I'm really trying to accomplish was very, very impactful. And I'm curious too, as we're having this conversation, if any of you have had to struggle with these same things, if there were tricks that worked for you for some reason, or that you want to share with the rest of the group, that would be very, very, I think, useful. On the bottlenecks and roadblocks front, the biggest challenge I had here was getting access to real information and cutting through all the BS to get to what actually mattered, working outside of theory and into practice. There were a lot of conversations that I had throughout the course of the year that were based around what if we did this? What if we moved this over to here? What if we changed these things? And those are great questions, but when it comes to actually bringing them about, the theory and the reality are very, very different things, or they require different mindsets and different skill sets to come about. And that was one of the key focuses, and it continues to be a key focus. This is not a solved problem for me by any stretch, but is to work through those bottlenecks and those roadblocks. And certainly not at any point was I able to ignore them. It was how to get through them and working through them on a real basis. And every approach was different every single time. There was no single strategy or tactic that I was able to bring to bear that would really just get past those bottlenecks and those roadblocks. And the last challenge I had to face, well, it's not the last challenge. The last one I have on this list here were big knowledge gaps, both mine and others. On the me side, it was trying to navigate the understanding of what the actual current state was at any given moment based on the question that I was facing or based on the scenario that I was trying to build or rebuild. Um, there were many using those theories, like what if we changed this? What if we moved our sourcing or our supplier from China to Thailand? What does that do for this scenario? Okay, well, what if we move it from China to Thailand, but then Thailand to Mexico, and we use the maquila down there to manufacture or partially manufacture and then bring it into the US? Or what if we bring it into the US first as a component, assemble it, ship it back out to Thailand, have them do some more assembly, and then move it to Mexico? And working through the scenarios, even as the actual facts in the of the day were shifting, sometimes Friday to Monday. There were a lot of challenges with that. And in the knowledge gaps of others, I take for granted a lot of times my 20 years of experience in the industry and the knowledge I've been able to build up myself over those years. A lot of people have been hearing about tariffs for the first time this year, or HS classifications, or substantial transformation. And working through some of those bare bones kind of 101 things just to get to a point where we could have a conversation about whether or not uh, a strategy is actually going to work, and then applying math to those strategies in a lot of cases. Does it actually reduce the total cost of ownership, or does it actually reduce the impact of the tariffs? If we ship it 3 times before it gets to the US as part of an origin engineering strategy, does it actually reduce our costs or does it increase them? So there was a lot of that. Um, yeah. Trial and error, I see mentioned in the chat here. Absolutely. Uh, and in fact, uh, people get frustrated with me when I tell them that a lot of these things end up being trial and error. Um, if there's a way to know what the answer is going to be and be sure of it before you try, God, I haven't found it. And if there was a simple solution, there'd be no point in having the conversation. So, yeah, a lot of times it's going to be let's try and see what happens. Let's put it all into motion and see what new bottlenecks arise. So, just sharing some of my experience, some of the things that I've had to build on, work through, navigate with my colleagues, with my clients, with myself, and hopefully you all have fewer challenges in 2026 as we maybe get acclimated to some of these challenges. So I wanted to take a bit of a overview, and sorry if my head's cutting off some of the words here, um, on when I sat down to think about how I actually approached many of the circumstances throughout the course of the year. Strategy, strategic thinking, that sort of concept is more or less meaningless. I feel like, or at least in the relaying of the story to an audience. So I kind of sat down and broke out what I think I actually did. And this is what I came up with. I didn't pull this from anywhere. I didn't use Chat GPT to generate strategic thinking. I just sat down and said, okay, how did I approach that situation? I went through a series of different things throughout the course of the year, and more or less, this is what happened. Uh, the times where I sat down to simplify the problem, come up with a clean way to state the issue, had better success than the times where I just kind of shotgunned a bunch of things and didn't really stop and focus on what challenge I was trying to tackle. So that simplification step, which probably sounds simple, was probably one of the most impactful. If I didn't stop and come up with that simple statement or simple idea of what I'm trying to do, I would often find myself going in the wrong direction, sometimes really far. And that really didn't help. It certainly didn't help with my stress. Um, so if it's reduced tariff impact, okay, I would work those ideas a little bit further than that. That's a little bit too simple, but in general, okay, if I want to reduce tariff impact, what can I work with there? And I move into this ideation stage, like, okay, what array of options are before me? And we'll take a look in the next slide about some of the options that kind of are on the table in that ideation thing for tariff impact in particular. Uh, I have found that depending on what the challenge is, the ideas on how to come up with a workable solution varied pretty dramatically. Sometimes it's a FTA-based challenge that we need to solve, and it has nothing to do with tariff impact. It has to do with coordinating suppliers and customers with the right documentation sets. Sometimes it has to do with coordinating the right data coming out of the organization so that we can do BOM analysis and product qualification properly. CTPAT. Speaking of CTPAT, I'm going to throw this one out there. Today, I believe it was announced that we can now add South African mutual recognition agreements in the CTPAT portal. I just heard about that, so I'm sharing that news. So if you have South African supply chain partners that are in the mutually recognized program, you can now add them to your CTPAT portal. Yeah, so depending on which problem I was trying to solve, the array of opportunities in front of me, again, leaning on my 20 years of experience, but also strongly on my network of collaborators and people that I work with, whether it's my client directly, whether it's my colleagues here at Star, whether it's people that I just know in the industry. If I have contacts that are willing to kind of have a conversation with me sometimes, say, well, yeah, well, this one time I did this. Would that work for you here? And coming up with those sorts of ideas and then testing them using an evaluation phase where I run down through that total cost of ownership or run through all of the scenarios of either in practice or just in theory, but evaluate whether or not any of those ideas are actually going to produce meaningful results on the other end to address that problem that I've decided is what I'm focusing on, what that simple problem is from that first step. I there in the evaluation phase, there were a lot of ideas that just were non-feasible. There were a lot of times where, yeah, that would be a good idea if we could make it work, but we don't have the tools in our toolbox to bring that about, and we had to scrap a lot of ideas. And in those instances where we could do that evaluation safely and effectively and completely, we were able to work ourselves down to what the most effective option was going to be. Through 2025, there wasn't a whole lot of time to evaluate, and most of the evaluation was in practice, and that's where that trial and error comes in. Uh, we definitely uh, started going down one path, and either the rules would change or we would run into a particular challenge. Sometimes on rerouting, we couldn't get off the boat in certain places and still maintain those benefits, or what we thought was going to work didn't play with the rules as they became evident in the CSMS and in other publications. So there was a lot of pivoting that had to happen, and we didn't really have the bandwidth to do the evaluation. But in those instances where we could have those conversations and work through those scenarios, they were more successful. What I found to be the most effective was a combination of a variety of strategies. So we would take multiple different concepts and get a little bit of progress from each one. There were no silver bullets this year. I don't know if anybody else has a different experience, but um, nothing. There was no one arrow in the quiver that we could pull out and shoot at the target and hit it squarely. So it was always a combination of a bunch of different factors. It was relying on our suppliers to work with us on costs, and in working with the customers to increase costs, and working with the brokers to find different ways to bring the goods in at certain dates instead of and holding them in bonded warehouses, things like that. A little bit of a lot of different tools came into play for us, for my clients and the people I've worked with. Um, the other piece that manifested quite frequently is, and not necessarily in the successful areas, but in arenas, or more so in the unsuccessful ones. If there weren't resources allocated to solving that problem, of working that solution, of bringing those combinations together, if they weren't the right resources, that was more often the case than not having any resources. It was they weren't the right resources. Those would provide big bottlenecks and big impediments to making progress. I don't have a solve for resourcing. I saw as part of the conversation here in the chat today. Um, Resources do exist. It's identifying them and figuring out how to use them most effectively. And resources can be people, it can be your own personal time, it can be um, on the web type stuff, it could be other people in the organization. There are a lot of different ways to approach the question of resources. And I find that most people tend to limit their scope of resources to what's normally in their purview, whether they're a team of one, and so they think that they're the only resource that they have to bear. Um, I found that this year, many more people were willing to pitch in and contribute what they could. Keeping control of those resources and having them contribute what they were supposed to or what they could to the most effect was its own effort all by itself. In prior years, that was never as evident to me as it was this year. Um, People wanted to help a lot in solving these challenges, but they didn't know how to. And then knowing how to communicate to them on how to help was its own set of challenges. So resourcing and giving people time to cook, uh, to borrow a younger generation's phrase, was probably the most important factor in setting things up for 2026. The more people, the more individuals that got exposure that were pitching in to help, the more online tools that we've been able to identify, the stronger the overall approach became. That's been my experience. Implementation. This one, it sounds a little bit redundant, but implementing those changes was often a major bottleneck, a major challenge, in that a lot of times the tendency was to try and wait until the solution became perfect. That's the wrong word. Until the solution became um, provably effective. I found waiting for that point to be counterproductive in trying to mitigate the tariffs. If that was my goal, was to reduce the tariff impact, and I was waiting for the right pieces to be fully aligned up for it to be a perfect solution or to be a very strong solution, I often found myself way behind and ended up not pulling triggers or not being able to pull triggers in time than when you started moving with an imperfect idea and with a concept that you knew was flawed, but that had legs and that you could work on as it was being implemented. This, I don't know how to um, convince people that this was effective for me, but moving was the most important piece of the challenges for 2025. Standing still was the least effective. Um, we had a lot of conversations where there was always another question to be asked, or another uncertainty that was going to be we were going to be faced with. We couldn't let that question or that uncertainty wait for an answer to come for that before making some sort of a move, before taking some sort of an action. And that's where the repeat piece comes in play. Even if you get something in motion, you need to go back to the beginning and see if it's effective, and is there a new idea or a different version of that same idea that you can bring to bear. Resource, re-implement, re-evaluate, go through all those steps again. Loosely, this is kind of the sum of all the things that I found to be effective for me this year. I can't I can't necessarily say that this will be effective for anyone else or that your minds work like mine does. I have many colleagues who this doesn't make any sense to them, and that's not a fault of mine or theirs. It's just we all work differently. But I find sharing this kind of information allows people to borrow some of the language that we're using and to communicate in their own terms. Like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but this is the way that I do it. And then you can find a strategy that works mutually in that environment sometimes. So I want to talk about that ideation phase a little bit more. Minimizing the impact of tariffs on the business. If our simple goal was to reduce the tariff impact, if minimize the impact of tariffs on the business, what are some of the tools and ways to make that happen? And so this is the ideation phase. This isn't wholly my list. I was at some conferences earlier this year. I've talked with many individuals. I have slides that other people have used. I kind of condensed this into a list that I think is probably the set of things that would be effective. There are many more things besides what's on this list here, but I wanted to talk through some of them and how they sort of percolated to the top and how often I felt that they were coming into fruition and actually manifesting results. So, from the perspective of tariff mitigation, there were four basic groups of efforts that would help reduce those tariffs. You could try to avoid entirely, or at least delay or avoid or reduce the tariffs through things like HS or country of origin engineering. The concept of country of origin engineering is novel to me in my career. That was never a major focus, but tariffs being based on country of origin has never been more prevalent in the US than it is today. So, um, would we be able to further manufacture? This is all within the bounds of compliance. Those of you that are familiar with the harmonized system or with substantial transformation, I would love to do full-on lectures for those sorts of things. But and we do have some on our website and on YouTube. But it can get very complex very quickly based on a specific topic. But this was one of the strategies that we used was HS and origin engineering. Also looking at shifts in the supply chain, whether it's changing suppliers or changing manufacturing locations or uh, moving raw materials to the US instead of a finished product. Things like that were all on the table. Stockpiling, sometimes not stockpiling here in the US, but stockpiling across the border by land and only bringing it to the US as it was being demanded or ordered. Not quite consignment, but certain versions of using warehousing and storage to mitigate or avoid paying certain duties. Valuation studies were a common theme this year. Are we properly valuing our goods? Is first sale an opportunity for us? Are we taking advantage of non-deductible charges? Working through all of those different factors and making sure that the math was correct for that entered value. Taking advantage of free trade agreements and making sure that the processes around those are rock solid. Uh, I've heard, and I don't know this to be strictly true, but I understand that Customs is hiring a bunch of auditors right now, and was during the government shutdown for the last month and a half, and has been working to build up their auditing teams, going so far as to um, rehire retired CBP people at 50% to double their previous salaries. So I don't know how accurate that is. I did read it as an article on The Hill. So there could be a lot more investigations coming. We have seen an uptick in CBP 28s and CBP 29s this year. So those of you that have been facing those, I'm sorry, and welcome to the club. Friendshoring, nearshoring, and reshoring have been on the table for a lot of different companies this year as they look at trying to shift their supply chain around by taking advantage of our partners that we have trade agreements with, or by taking advantage of resources that are much closer to home. The second bucket was passing on or sharing the costs and reworking terms and conditions, or including provisions for tariff increases in the terms and conditions with your suppliers and with your customers, so that you could either shoulder some of the costs on the supply side by negotiating better pricing, or on the sell side by increasing your price to your customers. And also evaluating surcharges and periodic adjustments, and making sure they're part of your contracts and are included in the considerations there. On the defer and delay front, these options haven't been particularly impactful, except for bonded warehousing, to my experience. FTZs, obviously, you cannot bring them in and withdraw them. You basically pay the rate of duty that they were entered under on the date that they were entered, that with that non-privileged foreign status. So bonded warehousing has been a little bit advantageous, but FTZs have not been in the same ways for the IEEPA tariffs. Suspending shipments and changing routes have had some success, but as the tariffs remain in effect, unless the Supreme Court goes a different direction, those might not have a lot of merit. And then on the recovery side, drawback, a lot of people interested in drawback without understanding the amount of work that goes into running a drawback program. For those of you that have done drawback, probably know what I mean. And it is a very challenging environment to navigate. But also PSCs and protests. And again, depending on what the Supreme Court says, whether or not these are going to be particularly effective for some of the IEEPA tariffs. We'll find out. This was just making sure that we had kind of surfaced some of the ideas that are out there. You guys can use some of these as a list or ask questions about what I mean about these things in the chat here. I would be happy to get to them. But for now, I want to ask about your successes and what has worked for you. So take a moment here. I'm going to give you a little bit extra time since there's a lot of words. What's been your experience so far? Which of these strategies have been useful for you? And there is a no, this is not my bailiwick option there, or none of these have worked. And this is, again, a select multiple. If you have something that has worked for you that is not on this list, go ahead and post it in the chat or ask a question about it. We'd be happy to talk about those things. If you have any questions about what these things are, this is a great opportunity to just post in the Q&A here. I'll get to it later, or put it in a chat, and maybe somebody in the chat will be able to help you understand. I don't expect everyone to know what all of these things are, and don't expect me to know all of these things at any given moment either. We'll give it another 20 seconds here. Okay, thank you all for bearing with us as we went through that. And I do see some active conversation there. I'm going to look at these results real quick, so give me a moment to kind of think about what I'm seeing. It looks like a lot of people are paying attention to evaluation, free trade agreements, temporary import bonds, Chapter 98, and similar, what I would consider to be trade compliance programs to um, kind of adjust your tariff exposure. I certainly spend a lot of my time in the valuation FTAs, TIBs, Chapter 98, and similar bucket. Those are all tools that are part of 19 CFR and are worth evaluating. So seeing a full third of you taking advantage of those things as well makes a lot of sense. HS and origin engineering, another third, 33% here. That has been a common point of conversation. Whether it's evaluating the accuracy of a long-standing HS classification or considering whether or not the supply chain can shift such that the country of origin and the point of substantial transformation occurs elsewhere in the world than the current, whatever it currently was. Typically for China, this came up a lot during the April months, March, April, May. China's rates are lower now than they were back then, so it's less of a recurring conversation, but there's a lot of options there. There's a lot of things I could say about substantial transformation. I'm not going to on this webinar, just in the interest of time. But what I'll do is I'll work through some of the things, the responses here, and kind of put some thought into them, and hopefully use this for next time as a basis for conversation and paying attention to what sort of resources need to be brought to bear to succeed at these kinds of strategies. So thank you guys for all of you for sharing. And I will continue on. There's only a couple more slides here, so and then we'll do some questions. Okay. Okay. So next month, I plan to talk about managing trade compliance up, down, and out, working with senior leadership. Some of the experiences that I've had, maybe we can have a guest that will speak to this perspective as well, depending on who's available. Working with teammates and direct reports or people, colleagues within the organization or across the company. And then working with your supply chain partners, like your suppliers, like your brokers, like your forwarders, to understand and navigate the challenges. There's been a lot of that activity in 2025. I think all of us that participated in these things have learned a lot of lessons. And I want to spend a few moments talking about those factors, what we've learned, and how those things can come to bear. So those of you that are on today's webinar, I believe you will get a survey after you leave. If you want to share any stories about managing trade compliance, how you've managed, not necessarily people, even if you're not a trade compliance manager, you certainly had to manage challenges within the trade compliance universe if you're on this webinar. So share your stories and how working with senior leadership, how has that been for you? Working with your supply chain partners, how has that been for you? Or if you are senior leadership, what sort of things were you struggling with the most, and why are you on this webinar? So if you guys want to share your stories, that would be fantastic. Some of the events that have occurred over the last month or so, we're seeing Section 232, timber and lumber and derivatives, vehicles, parts and buses. Supreme Court hearing was on, or the oral arguments were heard by the Supreme Court on November 5th. There's like a 600-page document of transcripts and several hours of audio recording that you can listen to. It's on the web. If anybody's interested in those arguments, the prevailing opinion I'm seeing is there are potentially 3 justices that are swing votes in this out of the 9. Um, we'll have to see. I don't have an idea on where they're going to land or what's going to be the fallout from any decision that they make. I expect it to be impactful, regardless of what they say. And if anybody has any special insights into the Supreme Court case on the IEEPA tariffs, I would be very interested in hearing your perspective. I have read a lot, and I don't have enough to form my own actual opinion right now. And there are more exclusions coming through, particularly on the agricultural front right now, with some Central American and South American countries, as certain PTAP deals are being negotiated. I wrote down what the acronym means, and I can't remember it, so I'm going to gloss over what PTAP is for now. It's eluding me right now. And then, okay, that'll bring us to Q&A. So we are at about quarter till, which is fantastic, a little bit earlier than the previous ones. The code for your NCBFAA credits, your continuing education credit, is on the screen right now. There are no O's in that code. They're only zeros. So hopefully that works for you. You will also need to include the dashes when you're saving the code. If you're entering this for credit towards NCBFAA, please double check whether you're entering the code at the link for the live webinar or the on-demand webinar. There's going to be different codes for live versus on-demand, so make sure you know which one you're looking at when you're going to enter the code if you're doing it on the NCBFAA website. Thank you guys very much, and let's tackle some questions. I did see a lot of communication in the chat here, but Michelle asks, can you elaborate on origin engineering? I'm familiar with tariff shifting, but origin shifting we are exploring, but having a hard time making sure we aren't falling into circumvention and requiring the business to basically plead their case for economic justification. The less so with the economic justification, it really is origin engineering to me is very much akin to HS engineering, classification engineering. The difference here being that you're doing it for substantial transformation reasons versus essential character reasons. So when considering tariff engineering, you're often trying to achieve a certain HS classification at a certain point of the materials production prior to arriving in the US. With origin engineering, we are seeing people trying to achieve that threshold of substantial transformation at a specific point in the supply chain before it comes to the US, much less so with regard to HS classification. So it's a slight shift in perspective, but less so with having to do with economic consumptive demand and things like that. And I did a training for substantial transformation for one of our clients earlier this year, and they're not US based. So trying to manage the considerations of country of origin in one country versus the US's standard, which is substantial transformation, versus what they use in the EU, what they use in Asia, what they use in different parts of the world. Just recognizing and clocking, really for the first time in my 20 years, that the lack of a WCO standard on country of origin is putting us in a difficult position right now. We've had the harmonized system from the WCO for decades now, but there is no unified standard on country of origin, and that is wreaking havoc on how companies are navigating these tariffs and reciprocal tariffs around the world against U.S. goods and what constitutes a U.S. good. So that's been a fascinating study for me this year. I've learned quite a bit. There were some questions on drawback earlier in the chat I saw. Yes, drawback allows you to recover up to 99% of the import duties paid if you have subsequently exported or destroyed the articles within very specific parameters of what customs allows. You certainly have to do it by the letter of the drawback provisions. Drawback was modernized in 2018, I believe, if I have that correct. And it's gotten a little bit more, I would say, clear, not easy, not simple, but it's become more clear on how to understand what drawback is. But yes, if you export goods that you have imported, you can recover a portion of the duty that you have paid. Export or destroy. And if you import components, there are different types of drawback that you could be eligible for: unused, substitution, rejected merchandise, a lot of different standards. But drawback is a program for getting money back. It just won't happen quickly. Um, I will mention that I typically tell people that it could be years before you see recovery of drawback if you're just now asking the question. So it's a great concept to have in place. It is expensive and difficult to manage a drawback program, but if there is enough money being paid on imports and there are enough goods being exported, it could be a very viable program. Is drawback allowed in produce as in agricultural stuff? Probably, maybe. I don't know why produce would be excluded from drawback, but there are certain factors there that I would not think that drawback would be the best program. You might want to be taking advantage of other programs before you think of drawback for produce. If it's being destroyed, yeah, you'd have to do it under custom supervision. It may not work the way you want it to. It looks like there are issues with the NCBFAA code presently, but maybe we will work through that as we go. Okay, I think I'm going to take advantage of the lack of Q&A there and give everyone time back. Again, I want to say thank you for just the participation in last week's Elevate Summit. Super excited that people came together, and I look forward to having continue this conversation next month on managing up and managing out and managing trade compliance generally. Thank you all again for your time, and look forward to hearing from you soon.